There are events in some people's lives that cannot be explained, and the following two stories are no exception. The mysterious blue glow. On the night of December the 31st, 1987, a woman named Mrs. Benson was awakened by the restless behaviour of a pet cat and dog. Assuming the animals wanted to go outside, she let them into the backyard, believing that this was the cause of their agitation. However, once outdoors, the pets became extremely frightened and frantic to come back inside. Perplexed by their panic, Mrs. Benson grabbed a robe and went to investigate the situation firsthand. To her shock, she observed her trembling dog crouched next to a nebulous, icy blue-coloured shape surrounded by a foggy grey-orange mist. Bizarrely, large electrical sparks or mini lightning bolts appeared to be emitting from the base of the hazy form and penetrating the soil below. Alarmed by the scene, Mrs. Benson attempted to retrieve a petrified dog. The moment she touched the animal, an intensely strange sensation overtook her body. She began experiencing a splitting headache and severe jaw pain. Pins and needles prickled across her skin as numbness set in. Concurrently, an ominous psychological shift transpired in her mind. Mrs. Benson felt an overwhelming sense that her very life essence was being drained from her body. Despite her best efforts, she found herself unable to move or call out to her husband for help. As the ominous fog maintained its position, Mrs. Benson grew increasingly convinced that she was slipping away into death. Meanwhile, her husband had awakened to investigate the odd noises. By the time he found his wife outside, she was barely conscious. In her debilitated state, Mrs. Benson was just barely aware of a sharp jab of pain at the base of her neck, as if a needle was being forced into the area. Simultaneously, the bizarre blue mist disappeared as quickly as it had manifested earlier that night. In the aftermath, all that remained was an acrid sulphur-like smell hanging in the air. Both the dog and cat sat motionless in almost trance-like states, staring blankly ahead, even after the fog had dissipated. Mrs. Benson seemed to have fallen into a similar stupor. It took several minutes to revive her from the apparent hypnotic trance. She was left bedridden for days after, suffering from intense migraine headaches and nausea. Additionally, Mrs. Benson's sweater was found to have several melted holes burned into the fabric. Forensic tests indicated that a powerful electrical discharge of some kind had struck her body, with enough heat to singe the sweater she was wearing. Now over a decade later, the Bensons still have no rational explanation for the events which transpired on that bizarre winter night. The only clues left behind were scorched clothing, frightened animals, and an unshakable sense of dread from a close encounter with the unknown. The vanishing hitchhiker, or variations such as the ghostly hitchhiker, disappearing hitchhiker, phantom hitchhiker, is where people travelling by vehicle meet with or are accompanied by a hitchhiker who subsequently vanishes without explanation, often from a moving vehicle. There is a place on the coast of New South Wales, Australia, where many people have been advised to beware of picking up a woman that is hitchhiking. Jenny Dixon Beach has a famous urban legend where what looks to be a normal-looking woman suddenly appears. Her arms are outstretched and she appears to be begging for assistance. People claim that as they were driving along Wilfred Barrett Drive, heading towards Norrville on the central coast of New South Wales, they claimed to have picked up a hitchhiking woman. The area is a narrow piece of land surrounded by the trees of the Warrabulong National Park, which itself is surrounded by two large bodies of water, the Tasman Sea and Tagara Lake. All of this area is known to be haunted. Witnesses claim to have seen a young woman standing at the side of the road, and she appears to be asking for a lift. The driver then pulls over and asks the young woman whether she needs a lift, and when she finds out that you're both going in the same direction, she jumps into the car. However, she does not get into the front seat, but chooses to sit in the back. Around the world, there are similar stories where people who claim to have picked up these types of unusual entities all state that the person does not talk at all and quite often prefers to point. But in this particular case, words were spoken, but very little was said, which was the case with this particular hitchhiker. The conversation was very short, and a voice appeared to trail off. In a classic example of a phantom hitchhiker, one second they were talking and asking questions, and the driver suddenly realizes that they're talking to themselves. This is a common scenario all around the world. As the driver took a quick glance into their rearview mirror, they found that the young woman they'd just picked up had vanished from their moving car, and they'd not heard the car door open or close. The driver said that they arrived in the town of Norrville in a state of shock and initially felt that they were going crazy. When they asked around to find any plausible explanation as to what had just happened, they found that they were not the first to experience such an ordeal, and that it happens all the time. Apparently, the local police in the town of Tukli have received many reports of such occurrences, and the locals knew all about it as well. This was not the first time that a driver had experienced such an ordeal, as this series of events had been happening for more than 40 years. The locals will tell the driver that they had just met the local ghost, whose story was a very tragic one. The hiking woman of Wilfrid Barrett Drive seems to be more than just a story, and has become a part of local lore. To find out more about the phantom hitchhiker, you have to go way back to the 1970s, where a young woman was making her way along Wilfrid Barrett Drive. In the 1970s, that particular stretch of road headed to Norrville and would have been long and dark and probably frightening for a lone hiker. On this particular occasion, the young woman in the story was hitchhiking along the road when a car came up from behind and stopped to offer her a lift. The car was full of young men, but the young woman nevertheless jumped into the vehicle. Unfortunately, they did not take her to a destination, but instead drove down to the local beach against her wishes. The young woman was then assaulted and beaten and left for dead in the surrounding scrubland. After a period of time, some locals had found the young woman badly beaten, but still alive, but unfortunately passed away a few days later. But before she actually passed, the police were able to communicate with the young woman, who said she wanted to seek retribution for what had been done to her. The police were unable to get a clear description of the young men, but they did have their suspicions. They picked up and questioned 5 young men, but without absolute proof, they were released. Unfortunately, in the 1970s, DNA testing was not available. Even though the 5 young men went free, it seems that the young woman did receive justice. Over the following year, there was a series of strange accidents and suicides where the young men involved in the assault lost their lives in various ways. 3 were killed in car accidents, 1 hanged themselves, and another died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Within a year, all 5 of the young men were dead. Maybe they had suffered from extreme guilt and were now tortured souls. Apparently, the young men had complained of seeing and hearing things leading up to their demise. For 40 years, people had reported seeing a young girl at the side of the road, and on many occasions, she has nearly caused accidents that people had to swerve off the road to avoid her. Even the police are said to have witnessed the apparition. Apparently, the young woman's name was Jenny Dixon, and the area she was found is now called Jenny Dixon Beach, and locals using the beach at the end of Wilfrid Barrett Drive report seeing the ghost of a woman. They said she appears out of nowhere and stands in the scrubland with her hands outstretched and looks to be appealing for help. She will stand back towards the scrub, having suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She holds her hands out to whoever she sees as if she's appealing for help. Many who know her story are aware of her plight, but are unable to do anything as they know she is a spirit, and her appeals are either ignored or they are too terrified to approach her. Historically, the area just south of Jenny Dixon Beach is called Nora Head, which is a piece of coastline that juts out into the Tasman Sea. It was once notorious for shipwrecks that would regularly occur for seamen and passengers who were unaware of the dangerous coastline. Vicious storms would blow their ships onto the rocks, or the ship would become beached. In the 35-year period leading up to 1871, at least 7 ships ran aground. Into 1903, a lighthouse was erected. Due to the many shipwrecks, other ghosts have been sighted, so the spirit of Jenny Dixon is not alone in the haunting of that region. Alien abductions became popularized in the 1960s and 70s, but there were claims of abductions from decades earlier. One of the earliest publicized cases were Betty and Barney Hill in 1961 and Antonio Villas Boas in 1957. Abductees often report being taken aboard extraterrestrial spacecraft, where they are subjected to invasive medical procedures, and many abductees recall the events through hypnosis. Common features of abduction reports include hours of missing time, vivid memories of surgery and examinations, beings with large heads and black almond-shaped eyes. The following are just two of the many cases where people's lives turned upside down after encountering aliens. Officer Herbert Schirmer. In the early morning hours of December the 3rd, 1967, an incident occurred along Highway 63 near Ashland, Nebraska, that would forever change the life of 22-year-old Police Sergeant Herbert Schirmer. Little did Schirmer know, when he began his overnight patrol shift that evening, that he would soon have an experience beyond his comprehension. Around 2:30 a.m., Schirmer noticed a set of blinking red lights emanating from what he assumed was a stopped truck along the lonely highway. As he approached the lights, prepared to offer assistance, Schirmer realized the source of the illumination was not a truck at all, but rather a metallic disc-shaped object hovering approximately 6 to 8 feet above the road. The craft, between 15 and 20 feet in diameter, had a shiny, polished aluminium surface and a catwalk that encircled its perimeter. The pulsating red lights shone out through windows along the exterior. Officer Schirmer brought his patrol car to a stop and stared in astonishment at the bizarre object. The mysterious craft began to slowly ascend vertically into the air, emitting a high-pitched siren sound and displaying a fiery glow along its underside. The sergeant watched in awe as the UFO gradually rose above the highway until shooting straight up into the night sky and vanishing from sight. Filled with a mixture of shock, confusion and curiosity, Officer Schirmer exited his vehicle and inspected the section of road where the craft had been hovering. He then continued his shift, returning to the police station where he logged the inexplicable sighting in the station book. Saw a flying saucer at the junction of Highway 6 and 63, believe it or not. Little did he know the real strangeness was yet to come. Later that morning, Schirmer noticed he had developed a peculiar headache and buzzing sensation in his head. Upon inspecting his neck in the mirror, he discovered a red 2-inch long welt just below his left ear. In the hours and days that followed, fragmented memories of the incident began to surface in Schirmer's mind. Schirmer realized that he'd had 20 minutes of lost time from his experience, and a short time later underwent hypnosis by Wyoming psychologist R. Leo Sprinkle as part of the Colorado Project. Under hypnosis, shocking details of his experience came into full view. According to his hypnotic recollections, after initially observing the craft from his car, Schirmer was escorted out of his vehicle and into the UFO by several small humanoid beings, between 4 and 5 feet tall. Their appearance was like anything the young officer had ever seen. Greyish-white skin, cat-like eyes that didn't blink, elongated heads and slit-like mouths. They wore silver-grey uniforms with gloves and helmets, featuring antennas on the left side. An emblem depicting a winged serpent adorned their chests. Schirmer was given a tour of the inner workings of the craft by the apparent leader of the beings. The entity communicated details about their origins and mission on Earth through a combination of mental and physical communication, facilitated in part by the antenna on his helmet. After approximately 10 minutes aboard the UFO, Schirmer was returned to his patrol car with hazy memories and vague warnings that the alien visitors would be monitoring him periodically. In the aftermath of his experience, Schirmer struggled to make sense of what had transpired. Local police chief Bill Velaskin visited the alleged encounter site and retrieved a small metallic artifact for analysis. Scientists concluded it was likely just ordinary earthly material. Over the years, Schirmer would periodically undergo hypnosis to extract more details from his subconscious about that fateful early morning. The bizarre tale of his contact with alleged extraterrestrial visitors would ultimately have lasting effects on his life and career. Skeptics claim Schirmer's story was confabulated or the product of an overactive imagination. Yet those who worked closely with the respected officer had difficulty reconciling how such a firmly grounded, reputable policeman could fabricate such an outlandish account. Researchers who hypnotically regressed Schirmer wondered if his narrative was factual or the results of deep mental conditioning by the unusual beings. In the absence of definitive evidence, the unbelievable events of that winter morning along a Nebraska highway remain shrouded in mystery. Herbert Schirmer maintained until his passing that he truly did encounter beings from another world who would forever alter his understanding of the universe and mankind's place within it. Brenda Butler. One Weird World viewer has confirmed this pattern of repeated abductions has occurred within her own life. Brenda Butler lives in Ottawa Valley in Ontario, Canada, and has written to us with her account of having been an abductee of extraterrestrial visitors since she was 8 years old. Brenda relates that at that age, she and her brother used to sleep at their granny's house on the weekends. They enjoyed the breaks and loved to sleep by their grandmother's pot-belly stove. One night when Brenda was lying in her sleeping bag, she heard her name being called, then an instruction to go to the back kitchen. She did so, and then felt herself pulled to the barn at the back of the house, which was near a big field. On reaching the barn, Brenda hid behind a bale of hay in the hayloft, then watched as the barn door swung open. Her account continues that there stood 3 beautiful ladies dressed in white gowns with gold-braided belts. There was a radiant light coming from the figures that surrounded them. She was told to come down from the hayloft, whereupon one of the women took one of her arms and the other took the other arm, and the third walked behind them. Brenda was led to the open field, where a ship was present, and as she continued up the ramp, the 3 female figures disappeared, and she was there alone. On entering the ship, she was confronted with a seemingly male being, dressed in blue and with blonde hair. He told Brenda that she belonged to them, and that was where the encounter ended. Brenda remembers that she was immediately back in her sleeping bag. Of her many recurrent abduction experiences, she relates this particular memory. She remembers that in July of 1994, she had come home from a hard day's work and decided to go to bed at 9 p.m. She was tired and it was also very hot outside, so she decided to sleep on top of the covers. As she lay on her bed wide awake, she saw a bright light enter into her room. She felt that she was frozen from her neck down, but she could still move her head, and as she looked higher up towards the window, she watched her own body lifting up. As she was now bodily heading towards the window, she became scared and closed her eyes. She was now on the outside of the window and heading up towards the sky. As this was happening, she watched as the house got smaller and smaller as she went higher and higher. She states that she was fully awake at this time and thought to herself, "Please don't drop me," as she watched the house disappear. Within minutes, she closed her eyes again and heard a click and, on opening her eyes, found herself on all fours on a platform resembling a phone booth. Brenda stood up and noticed there were a few steps, which she walked down. As she did so, she looked to her left and saw a huge corridor that went forever. The astonished thought ran through her head that this was a massive ship. Staring all around her and walking forward, she noticed another staircase, but it twisted around and around endlessly. She felt amazed, especially in light of the fact that she was wide awake to witness this strange structure. She also noticed that there were huge windows, but they were blocked out, and there was no one around, or at least she couldn't see anyone. The floors in the ship were metallic grey, and the walls were the same, and the interior of the ship appeared very clean. As she turned around, in an instant she was back in her own bed, with no explanation as to why she'd been transported on this strange trip. Brenda estimates that she'd been the subject to at least 5 or more abductions, and it says that she has been experimented on. At one stage she believed that all the sodium had been removed from her body. Over one weekend she suffered with very bad pains in her legs, and repeatedly consulted doctors who gave her analgesics. By Tuesday morning, a blood test showed, according to a doctor, that all her sodium had been removed. She then recalled the moment when she was lying on a table and heard voices saying that she had tough skin, that they would have to put the needle in to take out the liquid. Brenda's experiences do seem to align with those of other abductees. Some young children, usually between the ages of 2 and 5, say that they have been here before. They can show behaviours such as phobias or preferences that are unusual within the context of their particular family and cannot be explained by any current life events. They give various details about previous lives and even the name of that person. They often describe the way they died. There have been occasions where the families went to the places the child named and found that the person and the past events were indeed true. When Evan Michael was just a young boy, he started to write down the Russian alphabet. But his parents were not Russian. He had never been to Russia, and he had no Russian heritage whatsoever. So how did he know the Russian alphabet? His mother, Dana Michael, had no idea where he learned it, and it made no sense. As Evan got older, he started to get nightmares, and over a period of time, they became more frequent and more vivid. In the dreams, he told his mother that he was a Russian soldier and he was fighting the Germans. He said that his job was to take people out with a rifle, and believed that he was a sniper because in the dream he was always holding a rifle. After his many vivid descriptions, his mother figured there was a lot more going on, as his dreams coincided with his ability as a young boy to write the Russian alphabet. As Evan described his dreams, he would become distraught, saying that he did not want to kill anyone, but he had to, and had trouble coming to terms of what he had to do. He would describe the anguish, horror, dread, and constant fear. There is a scene where he is on his deathbed and he is being visited by a friend, and there is a woman, who he assumes is his daughter, holding his hand as he died. He believed he had died due to a problem with his lungs. For a young boy, the scene was fairly intense, along with his thoughts and emotions that were going through his mind as he was laying there on his deathbed. As he was dying, he had thoughts of his family, and it was sad saying goodbye to them, and it made him cry. His mother was so concerned about Evan's nightmares that she decided to take him to a counsellor, and after a few sessions they felt they were not particularly helpful. But one thing they did say intrigued her, as they claimed he appeared to be suffering from PTSD. This is a common affliction suffered by soldiers in war, but his son had never had any severe trauma in his life, so where was this coming from? Could it be that his son was describing a past life that was affecting him in this life? His parents started researching details their son was telling them in his dreams, and came upon a well-known Russian sharpshooter named Ivan Mikhail Chidorenko. Apparently, he was one of the best sharpshooters in Russia, and when Evan saw his picture, he felt a strong connection with the man, and they even had similar looks, especially when he looked into his eyes, where he really felt something. As they looked into further details about the man's military career, they seemed to match up with Evan's dreams. In 1944, Ivan Sidorenko was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, which was an extremely high and prestigious award. Ivan Sidorenko had fought in the Battle of Moscow, and a lot of the details about the Battle of Moscow were revealed in Evan's dreams. After more research, the family believed that their son could have been Ivan Sidorenko, and the weirdest of coincidences was that they even had similar names, Evan Michael and Ivan Mikhailovich, which totally floored his mother. As Evan entered into his teenage years, he continued to have nightmares, but not as frequent, but still had flashbacks and anxiety. Now older, Evan truly believed that he had lived the life of a Russian soldier during World War II, and his name was Ivan Michael Sidorenko, and his dreams always took place during World War II on the Eastern Front between the Germans and the USSR, around 1941 and 1942. In one dream, he was crawling through a trench, and there was a machine gun fire and bombs exploding, and everything was incredibly loud. He said it was himself, and 2 other men and 1 girl. He could see a large old factory in the distance, which he believed was their destination. They went there, and as soon as they entered, they felt safe. He remembers a man approaching him, and he was wearing a cap, and he put his hand on his shoulder saying, "Ivan, go up there." He was saying something like, "Davai, Makismo," or something like that, and pointed to the ceiling. As soon as he climbed up there, he could see some German tanks coming towards them. He thought, "Oh boy," and knew right away that they wanted him to do something, like pick them off or something, and remembers thinking, "That's it, holy crap, it's pretty much up to me to defend it." If he didn't, then they were all dead. Ivan said that it was a particularly terrifying dream. A psychotherapist by the name of Michelle Rubin came to visit Evan and his mother in Springfield, Missouri. His mother told the therapist that her son had had memories since he was a little boy of being a Russian sniper in World War II, which had caused him a lot of stress. She decided to work with Evan to help him overcome his frightening dreams, which Evan still found frightening. By this stage, Evan was about 15 years old, and she asked him how it affects his life now. Evan said that he still has the dreams, and although they were not as prevalent as before, he still has them, and they're still lurking around. He told the therapist that a counsellor had told his mother that his symptoms were similar to that of someone suffering from PTSD. They suggested he should go to a psychiatrist and that a pill might make him better. But a pill might not help get to the root of the problem. They did not believe that many psychiatrists would say, "Let's check out this past life thing." Evan told her that he'd read about how some souls need to keep coming back to Earth to experience every angle, where sometimes you're the victim and sometimes you're the perpetrator. Sometimes you're madly in love and some you're alone. That you have to come into many, many, many different lifetimes to gather all of that knowledge. It's not that someone's evil and someone's good. You're not going to be judged in that life if you killed someone in a war. And even if you were good at it, it doesn't mean you're a bad spirit or soul, and it was just that one lesson in that one life. Evan asked whether the dreams would ever just stop one day and be gone, and he would not have to ever worry about them again, or are they always going to be there? She said that he needed to work on it, to clear it, and only access it for different reasons if he wanted. Ivan feared they would keep going. She said it would probably be slow to go downhill, which helped allay Evan's fears. The therapist did not think Evan's past life in Russia as a sniper is something he has to get over per se, but gave him a couple of books and a worksheet that went with a CD that would really help him get more knowledge about the subject. Then he could look at it from the big picture perspective and not be so focused on the specific things that happened in this one lifetime for him. She believed he would get better and eventually move forward. The discussion gave Evan a better sense of direction with where he should go in his life from that point, and was glad that he was able to talk with Michelle to help him move forward.
Trains, boats and planes take us from A to B, but perhaps these forms of travel can also insert themselves in kinds of interdimensional time slips in our own awareness. Here are 4 accounts from Weird World viewers where these modes of travel bizarrely reflect a different reality occurring in some kind of folding back of the time continuum. Reality reset. Recently, Dr. Kapil Patsaria was travelling from Gwalior to New Delhi on board the Vande Bharat Express train. His seat was in the C7 compartment, and when he reached the platform to board the train, he noticed 2 coaches between compartments C7 and C6. These were named E1 and E2. After the train arrived at the platform, he boarded it and took his seat in C7. A few minutes later, the ticket checker came and verified his ticket, and shortly after this, the catering service arrived and he asked for food. However, they refused to provide any, claiming that he had not booked any. He was certain he had booked food, but decided there must have been some mistake, so didn't worry about it. After reaching Agra station, most of the passengers disembarked from the train compartment. Kapil was comfortably seated when a passenger approached him and asked him to vacate the seat, claiming it was his. Kapil refused to get up, insisting that he was in his assigned seat. This led to a small argument, whereby the stranger informed him that he was in the wrong compartment, C6 instead of C7. Kapil countered his claim by stating that he had boarded the correct compartment, C7, and that the ticket checker had already confirmed his ticket. In addition to this, the display board, both inside and outside the train, as well as on the platform, clearly indicated C7. Kapil related that suddenly all the other passengers started shouting at him, accusing him of being in the wrong compartment. They insisted he look at the display board, and to his surprise, it now displayed signage indicating that it was the C6 compartment. Kapil felt shocked and that something must be wrong. However, he silently got up from his seat and started to move towards the C7 compartment. With his awareness from his earlier observation that there were 2 extra coaches between the designated compartments, he expected to cross through 2 compartments to reach C7 from C6. However, while making his way towards C7 with his luggage, he noticed something strange. This time, The C7 compartment was directly adjacent to the C6 compartment, and the 2 extra coaches were completely gone. He was again utterly shocked by this sudden change, and had no idea what had just happened. With no other option, he took his seat in the C7 compartment. After a few minutes, the ticket checker reappeared and asked him to show his ticket. Again, Capel displayed it to him. However, this time, the ticket collector expressed disbelief and stated that he could not have boarded the train at Gwalior. Capel reminded him that he had checked his ticket earlier and questioned how it was possible for him to claim that he had not boarded the train. This strange incident that occurred during Capel's journey became even stranger upon reaching his destination of Delhi. He checked the train again from the outside, and there were no extra coaches between compartments C6 and C7. Equally, it would have been impossible for coaches to have been added or removed during his journey. He remains convinced that he switched from one similar dimension to another that day, and also troubled by the unnerving incident. He firmly believes that there are other people who might have experienced these glitches in the fabric of our reality. Flight back in time. While this account is well documented, Jody Harnish met the man involved, former astronaut Deke Slayton, during his lifetime, and therefore loved to hear about his involvement in the incident. It was witnessed by many that on June 13, 1993, a small plane was causing problems at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. The plane was flying low over the houses, and commercial pilots were reporting that it was not just a nuisance, but dangerously getting in the way. The airport was receiving a lot of calls about the rogue plane, which wasn't responding to air traffic control, and the callers all gave the same ID number for the plane. The plane was traced to Deke Slayton, a former US Air Force pilot, aeronautical engineer and test pilot, who was selected as one of the original NASA Mercury 7 astronauts and also helped develop the space shuttle. Despite his credentials, this behaviour was considered beyond the pale, and the Federal Aviation Administration sent him a letter to say it wasn't going to tolerate such unauthorised flights. The FAA was to receive a reply from Deke Slayton's wife, who wanted to know what kind of sick joke they were playing. At the time of this event, Deke Slayton was dying of brain cancer at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle. His plane was on display in a museum, and the engine had been removed, and so there was no way Deke Slayton was flying his plane around John Wayne Airport. But all the witnesses claimed otherwise. The much confirmed sighting was as if he had simply revisited an earlier, happier time in a perhaps less crowded sky in his comfort zone of solo flight. Disaster revisited. Nick Ainsworth received this personal account from his uncle, who was a retired sailor and used to work on board the Great Lakes freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson. The massive cargo ship would haul iron ore and limestone across the Great Lakes region of North America. One day, in November 2007, at around 7 p.m, the ship was crossing Lake Superior on its way to Cleveland, Ohio, when the crew started receiving distress calls on their radio. The unknown vessel sending the calls was claiming to be the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald famously sank on November 10, 1975, in a high storm, taking all 29 crew members with it. Coincidentally, the SS Arthur M. Anderson is known for having been the last ship to be in contact with the lake freighter before the tragic occurrence. Nick's uncle said that at first the crew thought that all the calls were some kind of distasteful prank. That is, until they checked the radar and found that there were no other ships around for at least 70 nautical miles. The range on the ship's radios is only 60 nautical miles. He said that the panicking voice they heard from the radio described a heavy storm and high winds and declared that the ship's crew were having a hard time holding their own. Nick's uncle said that you could hear true fear in the man's voice over the radio. But the strange thing was, there was currently no storm at all. In fact, the water was calm and the night was clear. Nick's uncle described that around 8 p.m, the distress calls on the radio came to an abrupt stop, leaving the whole room in a terrifying silence. For a full hour, his crew had listened to the horrifying crisis unfold on the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, which then came to a sudden end. The radio stayed quiet for the rest of the night, but nobody was able to sleep as they were all so unnerved by what they had just witnessed. They were well aware of a kind of ironic synchronicity in this event. This is given that not only was the ship his uncle was on, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, the sister ship to the Edmund Fitzgerald, but it was also the last ship to make contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975 when she sank. Nick queries whether his uncle and his shipmates may have actually made contact with the ghosts of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, or if there could be another explanation for this occurrence, such as a time slip back to that devastating event. It is definitely one of the most chilling accounts he's ever heard. Eerie footage. Rob, in Adelaide, South Australia, still remembers this strange event which occurred around 1993. He and a friend had returned to her home in the evening after they had both attended a presentation. This was in the day of VHS videos, and Rob had recorded some footage on a home video that he wanted her to see. He began trying to line up the video at the right spot while she was in another room. The part that started playing was home video footage of his young son playing at home, something that he had shot a few years earlier and was familiar with. However, suddenly the video changed, and what was being shown was a private jet being towed into a large hangar. He was shocked and perplexed by the visuals, as he had never been in a situation to video this. He called out to his friend to come and have a look at the footage as the moving images continued. The plane was eventually towed alongside where the camera was filming from. The plane stopped, and the camera then filmed the door of the plane opening up, still appearing not only unfamiliar but quite bizarre. Rather than the usual plane door, this was one that opened upwards, with a smaller lower section opening downwards that also contained fold-out stairs. By this time, Rob's mind was feeling completely confused as he wondered what on earth was going on. Then that piece of footage stopped, and the continuing images of his son played. Rob felt a little unhinged as he continued to tell his friend that he didn't film this. He quickly rewound the video, finding the original recording of his son playing. However, this time it just continued as normal. The segment showing the strange plane was missing, again completely inexplicable. Now they were both astounded and perplexed. His friend was to have a strange reaction as quite a few years later he started to ask her, "Do you remember that night when we watched that video?" And she cut him off and said she didn't want to talk about it. To this day, Rob can still see that plane footage in his mind 30 years later. The experience was so creepy that he's only ever told 2 other people about the event. They believed him whilst finding it hard to believe, and so the redeeming fact was that he was able to say that he wasn't alone or hallucinating, that a friend witnessed it with him. Perhaps a glimpse of something happening in another time dimension.